Elena Vargas had always been the person people called when things got difficult. She had spent 20 years solving problems that other engineers had given up on. She had fixed cooling systems in skyscrapers that everyone said were beyond repair. She had redesigned factory ventilation that had been failing for a decade. Her reputation was simple. If Elena couldn't fix it, nobody could. But now, for the first time in her career, she was beginning to wonder if she had finally found the problem that would break her. It had started 18 months ago with a phone call. The voice on the other end belonged to the facilities director at Grace Memorial Children's Hospital in Phoenix. His name was Robert Chen, and he sounded exhausted before he even finished introducing himself. The hospital had a problem. A big one. Their ventilation system was failing, and it was putting children at risk. Grace Memorial was not a new building. It had been constructed in 1987, designed by an architect who had won several awards for his creative vision. The building was shaped like an octagon. 8 walls, meeting at unusual angles, with a beautiful central courtyard that let natural light pour into the hallways. It looked stunning in photographs. Parents loved bringing their children there because it felt less like a hospital and more like a place of healing. But what looked beautiful on the outside was a nightmare on the inside. The octagonal shape meant that every room sat at a strange angle. The hallways curved in unexpected ways, and the ventilation system, which had been designed to work with this unusual layout, had never quite performed the way it was supposed to. For years, the hospital had patched problems as they came up. A new filter here, an extra fan there. Duct tape solutions that held things together, but never truly fixed the underlying issues. Now, nearly 4 decades later, the whole system was falling apart. Robert explained the situation to Elena during their first meeting. He walked her through the hospital, showing her the vents that barely pushed out air, the rooms where temperatures fluctuated wildly, and the respiratory ward, where children with breathing problems were supposed to receive the cleanest, most carefully controlled air in the building. That ward was the real crisis. The children there had asthma, cystic fibrosis, recovering pneumonia, and other conditions that made them extremely sensitive to air quality. They needed consistent temperature. They needed proper humidity. They needed air that was filtered and circulated correctly, and the current system could not give them any of that. Elena stood in the respiratory ward that day and watched a nurse adjust a portable fan next to a young boy's bed. The boy was maybe 6 years old, and he was hooked up to an oxygen monitor. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand and looking worried. Robert noticed Elena watching them. "We've had to transfer 11 children to other hospitals in the past 3 months," he said quietly. "Their parents trust us, and we have to tell them we can't keep their kids safe here. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Elena did not answer. She just pulled out her notebook and started writing. Over the following weeks, Elena assembled a team. She brought in the best people she knew. There was Daniel Okonkwo, a mechanical engineer who had worked on hospital systems for 15 years. There was Patricia Reyes, a computational fluid dynamics specialist who could model airflow patterns with remarkable precision. There was even Harold Brennan, a 72-year-old retired engineer who had designed life support systems for astronauts. These were not average consultants. These were the people you called when ordinary solutions had failed. And every single one of them believed they could solve this problem. At first, the work felt promising. Daniel mapped the entire existing ductwork, crawling through maintenance tunnels and documenting every pipe, every vent, every connection point. Patricia built computer models of the building and ran simulations showing how air moved through the octagonal structure. Harold reviewed the original blueprints and pointed out design flaws that had been present since day one. They met twice a week in Elena's office, covering the walls with diagrams and charts and calculations. They debated approaches. They tested theories. They proposed solutions, and every single solution failed. The first idea was to upgrade the existing system. Replace the aging equipment with modern, more powerful units. But when Patricia ran the simulations, the results were disappointing. The new equipment would push more air, but the octagonal layout would still create dead zones. Corners where air simply did not reach. Pockets of stagnant atmosphere that no amount of additional power could fix. The second idea was to install supplementary ventilation. Add new vents in the problem areas to compensate for the layout. But Daniel's analysis showed this would require tearing into walls throughout the building. The construction would take years and cost millions. And during that time, large sections of the hospital would need to shut down. The third idea was more radical. Redesign the ductwork entirely, creating new pathways that worked with the octagonal shape rather than against it. Harold spent weeks on this proposal, sketching elaborate networks that wove through the building like a maze. But when the numbers came back from the structural engineers, they showed that many of his proposed routes would compromise the building's integrity. The walls simply could not support the changes. Months passed. Ideas came and went. Every approach hit the same wall. The octagonal shape was not just unusual, it was fundamentally hostile to efficient airflow. The angles created turbulence. The curves disrupted circulation. What should have been a simple engineering problem kept multiplying into a web of interconnected complications. Elena began losing sleep. She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running through calculations in her head. She started dreaming about ductwork, waking up with half-formed ideas that fell apart as soon as she examined them in the light of day. The hospital board grew impatient. They had hired Elena's firm with the understanding that results would come quickly. Now, 18 months later, they had nothing to show for their investment except a thick folder of rejected proposals. Robert Chen called Elena every week. And every week his voice sounded a little more desperate. More children were being transferred. The respiratory ward was operating at half capacity. Staff morale was plummeting because nurses and doctors felt helpless. They were medical professionals, working in a building that was actively working against them. One evening, Elena sat alone in her office, surrounded by blueprints and calculations. The rest of her team had gone home hours ago. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The building was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning, which, unlike at Grace Memorial, worked perfectly. She looked at the octagonal floor plan for what felt like the 1,000th time. 8 walls. 8 corners. 8 impossible angles that refused to cooperate with the laws of physics and engineering. For 20 years, she had believed that every problem had a solution. You just had to be smart enough, patient enough, and creative enough to find it. That belief had carried her through challenges that had stopped other engineers cold. It had built her reputation. It had defined her career. Now, for the first time, she wondered if that belief had been naive. Maybe some problems really were unsolvable. Maybe the architect who designed Grace Memorial had created something that looked beautiful but functioned like a trap. A building that would slowly strangle itself to death, taking sick children down with it. Elena closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. She was exhausted, frustrated, and, if she was honest with herself, a little bit scared. She had no idea that the answer she had been searching for was about to walk through her front door. And she had no idea that it would come from someone who was only 8 years old. It was a Saturday morning in late October when everything changed. Elena had planned to spend the entire weekend working. She had cleared her schedule, stocked her refrigerator with coffee and takeout containers, and spread the hospital blueprints across her kitchen table. This was going to be a focused, uninterrupted work session. She was determined to find something, anything, that her team had missed. Her phone rang at 9 in the morning. It was her younger sister, Maria. Maria's voice was rushed and apologetic before she even finished saying hello. There was an emergency at her job. A pipe had burst at the restaurant she managed, and she needed to get there immediately. Her husband was out of town for a business trip. Her usual babysitter was not answering the phone. She had no one else to call. "I know you're busy," Maria said. "I know you have work. But I really need your help. Just for a few hours. Please." Elena looked at the blueprints covering her table. She thought about the phone call she would inevitably get from Robert Chen on Monday, asking if there was any progress. She thought about the children in the respiratory ward, waiting for a solution that she could not find. Then she thought about her sister, who almost never asked for help, standing in a flooded restaurant with no one to watch her daughter. "Bring her over," Elena said. 30 minutes later, Maria's car pulled into Elena's driveway. Out of the back seat climbed Lucia, Elena's 8-year-old niece. Lucia was a small girl with dark curly hair that never stayed where it was supposed to. She was wearing a bright yellow raincoat even though there was no rain, and she was carrying a backpack that looked almost as big as she was. Maria hugged Elena quickly at the front door. "Thank you so much. I owe you." She has books and crayons in her bag. She's really good at entertaining herself. "I'll be back as soon as I can." And then Maria was gone, her car disappearing down the street before Elena could say anything else. Lucia stood in the doorway, looking up at her aunt with curious brown eyes. "Mom said you're working on something really hard." "That's right," Elena said, stepping aside to let her niece in. "I have a lot of work to do today." "What kind of work?" Elena hesitated. "How did you explain complex engineering problems to a child?" "I'm trying to fix the air inside a hospital. The building is shaped in a funny way, and the air doesn't move the way it should." Lucia nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense to her. "Can I see?" Elena was about to say no. She was about to suggest that Lucia go sit in the living room with her books and crayons. But something in her niece's expression stopped her. It was pure, uncomplicated curiosity. The kind of curiosity that Elena remembered feeling when she was young, before problems started feeling impossible. "Sure," she said. "Come look." She led Lucia to the kitchen table where the blueprints were spread out. The papers covered every inch of the surface, layered on top of each other, covered in notes and calculations written in Elena's cramped handwriting. To most people, it would look like chaos. But to Elena, every mark told a story of failure. Lucia climbed onto a chair and knelt on it so she could see the blueprints better. She studied them with an intensity that surprised Elena. Most children would have glanced at the papers and lost interest within seconds. But Lucia was tracing the lines with her eyes, following the shapes and patterns as if she was trying to understand them. "What's this shape?" Lucia asked, pointing at the main floor plan. "That's the hospital. It has 8 sides, like a stop sign." "Why did they make it like that?" Elena sighed. "Because the person who designed it thought it would look nice. And it does look nice. But it makes my job very difficult." "Why?" This was the question Elena had been asking herself for 18 months. She tried to think of a way to explain it that an 8-year-old would understand. "Okay," she said, sitting down next to Lucia. "Imagine you're trying to blow air through a box. A normal box, with 4 sides. The air goes in one end and comes out the other end. Simple, right?" Lucia nodded. "But this building isn't a box. It has 8 sides, and they're all at weird angles. So when you try to blow air through it, the air gets confused. It bounces off the corners. It gets stuck in places. It doesn't go where you want it to go." Lucia thought about this for a moment. "So, the corners are the problem?" "Exactly. The corners are the problem." Lucia looked back at the blueprints. She was quiet for a long time. Elena watched her niece, wondering what was going on inside that young mind. Children saw the world differently than adults. They didn't have decades of training telling them what was possible and what wasn't. They didn't have experience weighing them down. Sometimes Elena envied that. "Aunt Elena," Lucia said finally, "why do you have to go around the corners?" Elena frowned. "What do you mean? You said the air bounces off the corners and gets stuck. So why do you have to send the air around the edges? Why can't it go through the middle instead?" "Looking stay. Anmender konstri." Elena opened her mouth to explain why that wouldn't work. She had a dozen technical reasons ready. The existing infrastructure, the placement of the ductwork, the way the building had been designed from the beginning. But the words caught in her throat. Lucia wasn't finished. She grabbed a crayon from her backpack and started drawing on a napkin. She drew a rough octagon, 8 wobbly lines forming a shape that looked more like a lumpy circle. Then she put a dot in the center of it. "What if the air starts here?" she said, pointing at the center dot. "And then it goes out to all the sides at the same time? Like this." She drew lines radiating out from the center, each one reaching toward a different wall. When she was finished, the drawing looked like a star, or a sun with rays beaming outward. Or, Elena realized with a sudden chill running down her spine, like a pinwheel. "See?" Lucia said, holding up her napkin proudly. "It doesn't have to go around. It can go straight." Elena stared at the drawing. Such a simple image. 8 lines coming out of a center point, spreading toward the edges of an octagon. A child's solution to a problem that had stumped some of the best engineers in the country. It couldn't possibly work. Could it? Elena's mind started racing. She had spent 18 months trying to route airflow along the perimeter of the building, following the walls, working with the existing duct layout, fighting against the angles at every turn. But what if the answer wasn't to fight the shape? What if the answer was to ignore the walls entirely and work from the inside out? A central hub. A ventilation core right in the middle of the building. Ducts radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. Each section of the octagon receiving direct, unobstructed airflow from the center. The corners wouldn't matter anymore. The strange angles wouldn't create dead zones. The air would travel in straight lines, following the simplest possible paths. Elena's heart was pounding. She felt the way she imagined scientists felt when they were on the edge of a discovery. That electric sensation of something big taking shape in her mind. "Lucia," she said slowly, "can I keep this napkin?" Lucia shrugged. "Sure. I can draw another one, if you want. Do you like it?" Elena looked at her niece. This small girl in a yellow raincoat, who had just casually suggested something that might revolutionize the entire project. "I don't know yet," Elena said honestly. "But I think you might have just done something very important." Lucia beamed. "Can I have a snack now?" Elena laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks. "Yes," she said. "You can have whatever you want." She got Lucia a bowl of crackers and some apple slices, then set her up in the living room with her coloring books. But Elena's mind was somewhere else, entirely. She kept glancing at the napkin drawing. That simple pinwheel shape that challenged everything she had assumed about this project. By the time Maria came back that evening, Lucia had colored 3 pictures, eaten half a bag of pretzels, and fallen asleep on the couch, with a book on her chest. And Elena had filled an entire notebook with calculations. Elena did not sleep that night. She could not. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the pinwheel. Those simple lines, radiating outward from a center point. A child's crayon drawing that refused to leave her alone. After Maria picked up Lucia, Elena went straight back to her kitchen table. She pushed aside the old blueprints, the failed proposals, the months of frustrated calculations. She took out a fresh sheet of paper and started from scratch. The first thing she did was redraw the octagonal floor plan. But this time, instead of focusing on the walls and corners, she focused on the center. She marked a point right in the middle of the building, exactly where the courtyard was located. That beautiful central courtyard that let natural light pour into the hallways. The one architectural feature that everyone loved but nobody had thought to use. What if that courtyard wasn't just for light? What if it could be the heart of a completely new ventilation system? Elena started sketching. She drew a circular hub in the center of the building, a structure that would house the main ventilation equipment. From that hub, she drew 8 ducts, each one extending outward toward a different wall of the octagon. The ducts would carry air directly from the center to every section of the building. No winding paths along the perimeter. No fighting against corners. Just straight, efficient lines of airflow. The more she drew, the more excited she became. This wasn't just a minor adjustment. This was a complete reimagining of how the building could work. She grabbed her calculator and started running numbers. How much air could a central hub push outward? What size would the ducts need to be? How would the return air cycle back to the center for recirculation? The hours disappeared. Midnight came and went. Then 1 in the morning. Then 2. Elena barely noticed. She was in that rare state of mind where everything else faded away, and only the problem existed. Every calculation led to another question. Every question led to another possibility. By 3 in the morning, she had filled an entire notebook. Her hand was cramping from writing so much. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. But she had something. For the first time in 18 months, she had something that felt real. The basic concept was elegant in its simplicity. The central hub would draw in outside air, filter it, condition it to the right temperature and humidity, and then push it outward through the 8 main ducts. Each duct would serve one section of the octagon, delivering fresh air directly to the rooms in that area. The used air would be collected through a separate system of return vents and cycled back to the center for processing. The octagonal shape, which had been the source of every problem, would actually become an advantage. Each wall section was roughly the same size, which meant the airflow could be balanced evenly across all 8 ducts. No section would receive more or less air than another. The symmetry that made the building beautiful would also make the ventilation efficient. But Elena knew that a concept was not enough. She needed proof. She needed numbers that showed this could actually work. She spent the rest of the night building a rough mathematical model. She calculated airflow rates based on the building's square footage. She estimated the pressure needed to push air through ducts of various sizes. She figured out how the return air system would need to be designed to maintain proper circulation. When the sun came up on Sunday morning, Elena was still at her kitchen table. Her eyes burned from staring at papers for so long. Her back ached from hunching over calculations. But she was smiling. The numbers worked. They actually worked. There were still 1,000 details to figure out. She would need Patricia to run proper computer simulations. She would need Daniel to assess whether the existing infrastructure could support the new design. She would need Harold's expertise on air handling equipment. But the foundation was solid. The concept made sense. Elena finally allowed herself to sleep for a few hours. When she woke up, she immediately called Patricia. "I need you to run a simulation," Elena said. "Something completely different from what we've been trying." Patricia sounded surprised. They had run dozens of simulations over the past year and a half. "What did you have in mind?" Did you have in mind? Elena explained the pinwheel concept. Central hub, radial ducts, airflow from the inside out, instead of around the perimeter. She could hear Patricia's skepticism through the phone. "Elena, we've been focusing on the existing ductwork for a reason. Building a central hub would mean major construction. The hospital board isn't going to approve something like that. Just run the simulation," Elena said. "Please. I need to know if the airflow works before I worry about anything else." Patricia agreed, though she still sounded doubtful. Elena spent the rest of Sunday pacing around her house, waiting for results. She tried to work on other things. She tried to read. She tried to watch television. Nothing held her attention. Her mind kept returning to the pinwheel. The call came late Sunday evening. Patricia's voice was different now. The skepticism was gone. In its place was something Elena had not heard from her colleague in months. Excitement. "Elena, I don't know where this idea came from, but the numbers are incredible. Tell me." Patricia walked her through the simulation results. The central hub design produced consistent airflow to every section of the building. The dead zones that had plagued every previous proposal simply did not exist. Air moved in clean, straight lines from the center to the perimeter. The octagonal shape, instead of creating turbulence, actually helped distribute the airflow evenly. The efficiency improvement, is significant, Patricia said. We're looking at a potential 30% reduction in energy costs compared to the current system. Maybe more once we optimize the design. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. 30%. That wasn't just a technical improvement. That was money the hospital could use for patient care, for equipment, for staff. There's more, Patricia continued. The air quality metrics are off the charts. The filtration at the central hub means cleaner air reaching every room. The respiratory ward would have some of the best air quality of any pediatric facility in the state. Elena thought about the young boy she had seen on her first visit to the hospital. The one with the oxygen monitor, his mother holding his hand. She thought about the 11 children who had been transferred because the hospital couldn't keep them safe. This could change everything for them. On Monday morning, Elena arrived at her office before anyone else. She spent 2 hours preparing a presentation. She organized her calculations, Patricia's simulation results, and the basic design concepts into a clear, logical sequence. She even included a scan of Lucia's napkin drawing. Though she wasn't sure yet whether she would share where the idea came from. When her team arrived, she gathered them in the conference room. I know we've all been frustrated, she began. I know some of you have started to wonder if this project is even possible. I've wondered the same thing. But over the weekend, I had a breakthrough, and I need you to look at this with fresh eyes. She walked them through the pinwheel concept. She showed them the numbers. She displayed Patricia's simulation results on the screen. The room was silent when she finished. Daniel was staring at the central hub diagram with his mouth slightly open. Harold was nodding slowly, his experienced eyes moving across the technical details. Patricia was smiling, already thinking about how to refine the simulations further. This is going to require significant construction, Daniel said finally. We're talking about building an entirely new structure in the center of the hospital. I know, Elena said. The hospital board might not approve the cost. I know that too. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Well, if the numbers hold up, I think we should try. Harold spoke up. I've been designing ventilation systems for 50 years, worked on spacecraft, submarines, everything you can imagine, and I have never seen anyone approach an octagonal building this way. He paused. It's brilliant. Whoever thought of this is either a genius or completely crazy. Elena smiled. Maybe a little of both, she said. She didn't tell them yet that the idea had come from an 8-year-old girl with a crayon and a napkin. That could wait. Right now, what mattered was that they had hope again. For the first time in 18 months, they had a real chance. The hospital board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Elena spent every moment leading up to it preparing. She refined the presentation. She double-checked every calculation. She anticipated every question the board might ask and prepared answers for each one. She was ready for a fight. What she was not ready for was the resistance that came from inside her own team. It started on Tuesday morning. Tom Hadley, the senior engineer who had been with the firm longer than anyone else, asked to speak with Elena privately. Tom was 63 years old, highly respected, and had a reputation for being cautious. He had worked on hundreds of projects over his career, and he had seen plenty of ideas that looked promising on paper, but failed in reality. He sat down across from Elena in her office and got straight to the point. I've been looking at your proposal, he said. And I have concerns. Elena nodded. She had expected this. Tell me. Tom leaned forward. This central hub idea is creative. I'll give you that. But it's also risky. You're asking the hospital to tear up the center of their building and construct something entirely new. That's not a renovation. That's a major construction project. I know the scope is significant, Elena said. But the results justify it. Do they? We've run simulations. Yes. But simulations are not reality. What happens if we build this thing and it doesn't perform the way we expect? What happens if there are complications we didn't anticipate? The hospital will have spent millions of dollars on a system that doesn't work. and they'll blame us. Arc. 2. Elena understood his concern. In engineering, reputation was everything. One failed project could undo years of successful work. Tom had built his career on being careful, on recommending solutions that were proven and safe. This proposal was neither. Every major innovation involves risk, Elena said. If we only ever did what had been done before, nothing would ever improve. Tom shook his head. There's a difference between innovation and recklessness. I think you're too close to this project. You've been working on it for so long that you're desperate for any solution, even one that might not be the right choice. The words stung. Elena wanted to argue, but she forced herself to stay calm. And if she was honest with herself, a small part of her shared his concern. What would you suggest? She asked. Go back to the incremental approach. Upgrade the existing equipment. Install supplementary ventilation in the problem areas. It won't be perfect, but it will improve things without the risk of a complete overhaul. Elena had considered this option many times. It was the safe choice, the predictable choice. But she kept thinking about those children in the respiratory ward. An incremental improvement would help them a little. The pinwheel design could help them a lot. I appreciate your input, she said finally. But I'm going to present the central hub proposal to the board. If they reject it, we can discuss alternatives. But I have to at least give them the option. Tom stood up and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. I hope you know what you're doing, Elena. For all our sakes. The next 2 days were tense. Tom's concerns spread through the team like a slow poison. Some people agreed with Elena. Others thought she was taking too big a gamble. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere in the office was thick with uncertainty. Elena drove to Grace Memorial Hospital alone. She parked in the visitor lot and sat in her car for a few minutes, gathering her thoughts. Through the windshield, she could see the building's distinctive octagonal shape. The shape that had caused so many problems. The shape that might also be the key to the solution. She took a deep breath and went inside. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor. When Elena walked in, 12 people were seated around a long table. There were hospital administrators, financial officers, medical directors, and legal representatives. Robert Chen sat near the end, and he gave Elena an encouraging nod when she caught his eye. At the head of the table sat the board chairman, a stern-looking woman named Dr. Victoria Huang. She was a retired surgeon who had spent 40 years in medicine before moving into hospital administration. She was known for being direct, skeptical, and extremely protective of the hospital's resources. Elena set up her presentation and began. She walked them through the problem first. The failing ventilation system. The dead zones created by the octagonal layout. The children who had been transferred because the hospital could not provide safe air quality. She showed them data on energy costs, maintenance expenses, and the declining efficiency of the current equipment. Then she presented the solution. The central hub, the radial ducts, the pinwheel design that would transform the building's weakness into its strength. The room was quiet as she spoke. Elena could not read their expressions. Some faces showed interest. Others showed doubt. Dr. Huang's face showed nothing at all. When Elena finished, she opened the floor for questions. The first one came from the chief financial officer, a man with gray hair and tired eyes. What's the cost estimate for this project? 1. Elena had prepared for this. Our preliminary estimate is between $4 and $5 million, depending on construction variables. A murmur went around the table. $5 million was not a small number for a hospital that was already struggling financially. And what's the timeline? Another board member asked. Approximately 14 months from groundbreaking to completion. We would phase the construction to minimize disruption to hospital operations. Dr. Huang spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm and measured. Miss Vargas, I've reviewed your firm's previous proposals for this project. All of them failed to solve the problem. Why should we believe this one will be different? Elena met her gaze directly. Because the previous proposals were trying to work around the building's design, this proposal works with it. The octagonal shape isn't the enemy anymore. It's the foundation of the solution. That's a nice philosophical statement, Dr. Huang said. But I need more than philosophy. I need evidence. Elena pulled up Patricia's simulation results. She showed the airflow patterns, the efficiency metrics, the projected improvements in air quality. She presented data comparing the central hub design to conventional systems in similar buildings. She laid out everything she had. Dr. Huang studied the information carefully. Then, she asked a question that Elena had not anticipated. Where did this idea come from? Elena hesitated. She had not planned to share the story of Lucia. It seemed too unusual, too unlikely. Would a room full of serious professionals really want to hear that their multi-million-dollar solution had been inspired by an 8-year-old's crayon drawing? But looking at Dr. Huang's sharp eyes, Elena realized that honesty was the only option. It came from my niece, she said. She's 8 years old. She looked at the blueprints and asked why the air couldn't go through the middle instead of around the edges. She drew a picture of what she meant. A pinwheel. The room went very quiet. Elena saw some board members exchange glances. She couldn't tell if they were amused, skeptical, or something else entirely. Dr. Huang leaned back in her chair. An 8-year-old. Yes. She saw something that we had all missed. We were so focused on the complexity of the problem that we couldn't see the simplicity of the solution. For a long moment, no one spoke. Elena felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had just admitted that her revolutionary proposal had come from a child. The board could easily dismiss her as unserious. They could reject the entire project based on this one admission. Then Robert Chen spoke up. I've known Elena's work for almost 2 years now. She has poured everything into this project. If she says this design will work, I believe her. And frankly, I don't care if the idea came from a child, a dream, or a fortune cookie. What matters is whether it can help our patients. Dr. Huang looked at Robert, then back at Elena. Her expression was unreadable. We'll need to discuss this privately, she said. We'll have a decision for you by Monday. Elena nodded and gathered her materials. As she walked out of the boardroom, she had no idea which way the vote would go. She had given them everything she had. Now all she could do was wait. The weekend passed slowly. Elena tried to keep herself busy, but her mind kept drifting back to the boardroom. She replayed the meeting over and over in her head. Had she said enough? Had she said too much? Had telling them about Lucia been a mistake? On Sunday evening, she called her sister. Maria answered on the second ring, and Elena could hear Lucia laughing in the background. How are you holding up? Maria asked. She knew about the board meeting. Elena had told her everything. I'm trying not to think about it too much, Elena said. Which means I'm thinking about it constantly. Maria laughed softly. That sounds about right. Lucia wants to talk to you, by the way. She's been asking about your hospital project all week. There was a rustling sound, and then Lucia's voice came through the phone. Elena smiled, despite her nerves. I don't know yet, sweetheart. They're still deciding. Well, I hope they pick it. I think it's a good idea. I think so too, Elena said. Thank you for helping me, Lucia. You're a very smart girl. I know, Lucia said matter-of-factly. Then she handed the phone back to her mother. Elena went to bed that night, still uncertain about what tomorrow would bring. She slept poorly, waking up several times from dreams she couldn't remember. When her alarm went off at 6 in the morning, she felt like she hadn't slept at all. The call came at 9:15. Elena was sitting at her desk, staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed the hospital's main number. She answered immediately. This is Elena Vargas. The voice on the other end belonged to Robert Chen. He sounded different than usual. There was something in his tone that Elena couldn't quite identify. "Elena," he said. "The board made their decision last night." Elena gripped the phone tighter. And there was a pause that felt like it lasted forever. They approved it. The full proposal. Construction starts in 6 weeks. Elena closed her eyes. For a moment, she couldn't speak. All the tension, all the doubt, all the sleepless nights came rushing out of her at once. She felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. "Elena, are you still there?" "I'm here," she managed to say. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for believing in this. Thank you for not giving up," he said. "Dr. Huang wanted me to tell you something." She said that in 40 years of medicine and administration, she's learned that the best solutions often come from unexpected places. She said, "Your niece sounds like someone the world should watch out for." Elena laughed through her tears. "I'll tell her you said that." The next 14 months were the busiest of Elena's career. Construction began in early December, right in the center of the hospital's courtyard. The beautiful open space that had once been used for gardens and benches was transformed into a construction zone. Cranes lifted equipment over the building's octagonal walls. Workers in hard hats moved through the area at all hours. Elena visited the site every week, sometimes more often. She watched the central hub take shape piece by piece. First came the foundation, a thick concrete platform that would support the ventilation equipment. Then came the walls of the hub itself, a cylindrical structure that rose 3 stories high. Finally came the equipment, massive air handlers and filtration systems that would form the heart of the new system. The 8 main ducts were installed next, each one extending outward from the hub like the spokes of a wheel. Workers cut carefully through walls and ceilings, routing the ducts to every section of the building. It was delicate work. The hospital had to remain operational throughout the construction, which meant coordinating around patient care, surgeries, and daily operations. There were challenges along the way. Of course there were. One of the ducts hit an unexpected obstacle, an old support beam that wasn't shown on the original blueprints. The team had to redesign that section on the fly, finding a new route that worked around the obstruction. Another time, a shipment of specialized filters was delayed by 3 weeks, throwing off the entire installation schedule. But they pushed through. Every problem had a solution. Every setback was temporary. Elena's team worked with a determination she had never seen before. They believed in this project now. They had seen the numbers, understood the design, and committed themselves to making it work. 14 months after construction began, the new ventilation system was ready for testing. Elena stood in the central hub on the day of the activation. The space was impressive, filled with gleaming equipment and control panels. Above her head, 8 massive ducts extended outward, disappearing into the building's structure. In a few minutes, air would flow through those ducts for the first time. Robert Chen stood beside her, along with Dr. Huang and several other board members. The respiratory ward staff had gathered nearby, eager to see the results. Even Tom Hadley was there, his skeptical expression replaced by something closer to cautious hope. "Ready?" Robert asked. Elena nodded. "Ready." A technician pressed a button on the control panel. There was a low hum as the equipment powered up. Then, slowly, Elena felt it. A gentle flow of air moving around her. Clean, fresh, perfectly conditioned air flowing outward through the ducts, spreading to every corner of the building. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then, Dr. Huang pulled out her phone and called someone. "What are the readings in the respiratory ward?" She listened, and a rare smile crossed her face. "Temperature is exactly where it should be. Humidity is perfect. Air quality readings are the best we've ever recorded." A cheer went up from the respiratory ward staff. Elena felt hands clapping her on the back. Robert was grinning widely. Even Dr. Huang looked genuinely pleased. The system worked. It actually worked. Over the following weeks, the results exceeded every projection. Airflow efficiency improved by 34% compared to the old system. Energy costs dropped significantly. The respiratory ward reopened at full capacity for the first time in over 2 years. Children who had been transferred to other hospitals began returning to Grace Memorial. The young boy Elena had seen on her first visit, the one with the oxygen monitor, was one of them. His mother wrote a letter to the hospital, expressing her gratitude. She said her son was breathing easier than he had in years. Elena received an industry award for the ventilation design. The ceremony was held in a hotel ballroom, with hundreds of engineers and executives in attendance. When she walked to the podium to accept the award, she felt strangely calm. She thanked her team. She thanked the hospital staff. She thanked Dr. Huang and the board for taking a risk on an unconventional idea. Then she told the story that she had kept mostly private until now. 18 months into this project, I was ready to give up. She said, I thought I had found a problem that couldn't be solved. Then one Saturday morning, my 8-year-old niece looked at the blueprints and asked a simple question. Why does the air have to go around? Why can't it go through the middle? Why? The audience was silent, listening. She drew a pinwheel on a napkin. 8 lines coming out of a center point. That drawing became the foundation of everything you see today. A child saw what a team of experienced engineers could not see, because she hadn't learned to be afraid of simple answers. Elena paused and looked out at the crowd. I framed that napkin. It hangs in my office now, right next to my engineering degrees. And honestly, I think it might be the most important thing on that wall. After the ceremony, Elena drove to her sister's house. Lucia was waiting on the front porch, wearing a new dress that Maria had bought for the occasion. She ran to Elena and hugged her tightly. Mom showed me the video of your speech, Lucia said. You talked about me. Of course I did, Elena said. You're the real hero of this story, Lucia beamed. Does this mean I'm an engineer now? Elena laughed and knelt down to look her niece in the eye. It means you're something even better. You're someone who asks the right questions. Never stop doing that. Okay? Even when people tell you something is too complicated, especially then. Lucia nodded seriously. I promise. Elena hugged her again and looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere across the city, children were breathing clean air in a hospital that had been saved by a pinwheel. Sometimes the biggest answers come from the smallest voices. You just have to be willing to listen.